come to function as a stunningly comprehensive and well-disguised system of racial control analogous to Jim Crow. As I explained in the introduction to the book, what has changed since the collapse of Jim Crow has less to do with the basic structure of our society than the language we use to justify it. In the era of colorblindness, it's no longer socially permissible to use race explicitly as a justification for discrimination, exclusion, and social contempt. So we don't. Rather than rely on race, we use our criminal justice system to label people of color criminals, and then engage in all the practices we supposedly left behind. Today, it is perfectly legal to discriminate against criminals in nearly all the ways in which it was once legal to discriminate against African Americans. Once you're labeled a felon, the old forms of discrimination, employment discrimination, housing discrimination, denial of the right to vote, exclusion from jury service, all suddenly legal. As a criminal, you have scarcely more rights and arguably less respect than a black man living in Alabama at the height of Jim Crow. We have not ended racial caste in America, we have merely redesigned it. Quickly. It took years of working on issues of racial profiling, drug law enforcement in poor communities of color, working on behalf of those who had been victims of police brutality and violence, working alongside those individuals and families who are dealing with all the challenges of quote-unquote re-entry. I slowly had this process of awakening, and there were a number of events, experiences that caused me to reawaken, but one in particular stands out. There was a young man, young African-American man, could be no more than about 19 years old, who walked into conference room one day. I had been spending the day interviewing victims of racial profiling. We had already filed a lawsuit against the California Highway Patrol challenging their racial profiling practices in drug law enforcement. And we were looking at the possibility of suing other police departments in the area. This was back when it was actually possible to sue for racial profiling. The Supreme Court's pretty much eliminated that possibility. But this was back when it was actually possible to do so. And so I would spend the day interviewing one person after another. We had set up a hotline for people to call if they believed they were stopped or targeted by the police on the basis of race, and we had received thousands of calls. So I had spent the day interviewing folks who had experienced discrimination, often brutality at the hands of the police. And in walks this young man with a stack of papers. And he had taken detailed notes of a series of police stops that had occurred, to him in his neighborhood in Oakland over a period of about 9 months. Detailed notes, time, dates, locations, names of officers, witnesses, who was present. I thought, my God, this is a dream. You don't get plaintiffs like this very often who can give you names of officers, dates, times, locations, witnesses, the whole nine. He was smart, well-spoken. I thought, he's a dream plaintiff. I kept telling him, I'm so happy you're finally going to be able to help validate, the stories of others in Oakland. And then he said something that made me think, wait, does he have a felony record? Did he say he had a felony? So I said, did you say you had a felony? And he just goes quiet. And he's like, yeah, I have a felony. I have a drug felony. And I said, I'm so sorry. I immediately started apologizing. We're not going to be able to use you as a named plaintiff. There's no way we can use you, if you have a criminal record. The law enforcement will just argue they should be targeting folks like you. The media will have a field day with you. I'm so sorry. I just kept apologizing. We can't use you. And he says, well, I was framed. I was set up. Officers planted drugs on me and they beat up my friend. He starts telling me the story about how he'd been framed and drugs been planted on him, and he starts telling me the names of those officers, and I stopped listening. I'm sorry. I cannot take your case. He becomes enraged. He starts yelling at me. He's like, how many of us do you think they are in my neighborhood? Try to go to my neighborhood and find a young black man they haven't gotten to yet. You can't find a young black man who hasn't branded already, who hasn't been gotten to yet. He said, I can't get a job. I'm living at my grandmother's house because I have nowhere to sleep. I can't even get food stamps to feed myself. I can't even take care of myself as a man. And I trusted you. I thought you would listen to me. I thought you would hear me. Snatches the papers out of my hand, starts ripping them up, shredding them in front of my face. I can't believe I trusted you. Turns around, walks out, disappears into the elevator. Well, a few months after that, I'm doing a public access television show in his neighborhood. We had been organizing, thousands of people in California to protest then Governor Davis's refusal to sign racial profiling legislation. We were organizing thousands of people for the demonstration with a live television show. Show ends, and in he comes, bursts through the doors, carrying this dirty potted plant, and he thrusts it in my arms, and he's emotional, saying, I just came to say I'm sorry. I see that you're working out here trying to do something for our people, and I'm sorry. He says, I snatched this off my grandmother's front porch. I'm still living at her house. I don't have any money or flowers, but here. And he turns around and runs out. I chase after him. He gets in this broke down car and takes off. Well, several months after that, I opened up the newspaper in my office one day, and what's on the front page? The Oakland Riders police scandal is broke. A gang of police officers in Oakland have been riding around, beating suspects up, planting drugs on them, framing them, and who's named as one of the main officers? The officer he had identified to me as having planted drugs on him and beat up his friend. And at that moment, the light bulb went on. He is right. He is right about me, that I am no better than the police, that I was doing to him what the police had done, that I had stopped listening to him the minute he told me he was a felon, that I could no longer hear him or give him an opportunity to tell his story and share his truth the minute he told me he was a felon. And I started asking myself some questions. Why is it we haven't been able to find a single black man in his neighborhood they haven't gotten to yet? He was right about that. We hadn't been able to find a single young black man in his neighborhood who didn't already have some kind of criminal record, who was over the age of 18. So I started asking myself some hard questions, questioning my assumptions about my own work, but also about the criminal justice system. And I found that most of what I believed, and I thought I knew a lot, most of what I believed about the way the criminal justice system operates was not true. It was just sheer myth. Sheer myth. Back then, I thought that rising crime rates were the cause of mass imprisonment. Not true. I thought the drug war was aimed at rooting out violent kingpins. Drug kingpins, violent offenders, drug kingpins. Not true. Not true. Back then, I thought that most illegal drug dealing happened in ghetto communities. Not true. Back then, I thought that black youth were more likely to engage in illegal drug dealing than white youth. Not true. Not true. And I thought that poverty, broken homes, and bad schools explained why so many of our youth were cycling in and out of prisons. And I thought that racial caste was part of our nation's history, not our present. Well, here are a few of the facts that I uncovered in the course of my research that were part of my awakening. More African Americans are under correctional control today, in prison or jail, on probation or parole, than were enslaved in 1850, a decade before the Civil War began. In 2004, more black men were disenfranchised than in 1870, the year the 15th Amendment was ratified, prohibiting laws that explicitly deny the right to vote on the basis of race. Of course, during the Jim Crow era, literacy tests and poll taxes kept black folks from the polls. Today, felon disenfranchisement laws do the job even better.